Have you ever felt that after a certain age, nothing could truly hurt you anymore? That life had already shown you enough, and any storm ahead would seem small compared to the ones you've already survived? That's what I believed. I was convinced that at 60, no word could cut through my certainty, no look could shrink my history, and no gesture would have the power to make me question who I am. But I was wrong. And before I tell you what really happened after that moment of humiliation that changed so much inside me, I need you to do something for me. Write in the comments where you're watching from, your city, your state, your country. I want to know how far my voice is reaching, because this story isn't just mine. This wound, this silence, this pain that feels too old to burn again, it belongs to many women who, just like me, have given more than they received, loved more than they were loved, endured far more than they should have. I want to know where you are, because maybe your road and mine have more in common than you think. When I say I was humiliated at 60, people might think I'm exaggerating. They might imagine I should have had the maturity to ignore it, the wisdom to brush it off, and the strength to simply turn my back and move on. Isn't that what they expect from a woman my age? That we stay firm, quiet, collected, no tears, no trembling, no breaking, as if time automatically hardens the heart, as if scars keep new wounds from forming, as if life somehow gets lighter after all these years. But nobody talks about the kind of exhaustion that arrives after 50, a soul-deep exhaustion, the tiredness of fighting, swallowing hurt, enduring more than anyone sees, the exhaustion of being strong all the time. And when someone touches that last fragile place in us, the one we try so hard to protect, the pain arrives differently, heavy, deep, almost silent. And that was exactly the kind of pain I lived. I could start by telling you exactly what happened, who humiliated me, or what words were used to hurt me. But that would be too small compared to what this story truly means, because that pain wasn't born on that day. It was only awakened. It had been living inside me, hidden in memories I avoided revisiting, in mistakes I tried to forgive, in promises that were never kept, in expectations I hid even from myself. It was there, asleep, breathing slowly, waiting for the right moment to stand up again. And when it finally rose, I understood it wasn't just about that single humiliation. It was about a lifetime spent trying to be strong, trying to be enough, trying to be seen. It's strange how life surprises us exactly when we think we've reached some kind of peace. At 60, I thought I finally understood who I was. A woman who learned early on to carry everyone else, to put other people's needs before her own, to swallow her tears to keep her home standing, to smile even when her world was falling apart. Maybe you know that kind of woman. Maybe you are that kind of woman, the one who doesn't complain, the one who holds everything together, the one who tries every single day to be the foundation everyone rests on. I spent decades being that person, and when I finally thought I could rest, live a little for myself, maybe be cared for instead of always being the one who cares, life decided to test me again. And what happened that day wasn't just humiliation. It was a break, a fracture no one could see, as if someone pulled out the last beam holding up whatever hope I had left. It wasn't just the words. It wasn't just the look. It wasn't just the disrespect. It was the intention, the coldness, the certainty with which they said it, the way they treated me as if I had no history, no value, no past, no name, as if I were disposable, as if I had become a burden, a shadow, an inconvenience. That was the moment I realized how often we, older Black women with full, complex lives, are still treated as if we don't matter, as if our age means weakness, as if our stories carry no weight, as if everything we've endured to get here is invisible to people who've never taken a single step carrying the kind of weight we carry. And maybe that's why this story matters so much. It isn't just about what they did to me. It's about what so many of us keep living through in silence, the humiliations disguised as jokes, the comments meant to diminish us, the lack of recognition, the loneliness that settles in when we realize the love we gave never came back in the same measure. I don't know what moment you're facing in your life right now, but if you're still here, reading these words, something inside you recognizes this pain. Maybe someone disrespected you. Maybe someone made you feel small. Maybe someone forgot everything you did for them. Maybe someone took advantage of your silence, the same way they did with me. Or maybe you're tired to your bones, trying to understand why it feels so easy for others to wound you. And that's exactly why you need to hear what comes next, because even though this story begins with pain, it doesn't end there. Even though I was humiliated, even though I cried alone, even though I felt invisible, what happened afterward surprised even me. I didn't expect it. They certainly didn't expect it. And somehow, in a way only life understands, life showed me that nothing we live goes unnoticed. There is always a return, a response, a turning point. But before I reach that moment, I need to go back. I need to open this old wound slowly, layer by layer, so you understand the magnitude of what it carried. Because this wasn't a simple humiliation. It was deep. It was intentional. It was crafted to break me. But without realizing it, they pushed me onto a path I never imagined I would walk at 60. A path that changed everything. And a path that, maybe, will change something inside you too. I'm going to tell you exactly how it happened. But not now. Not yet. Because first, you need to feel the weight of this story. You need to step with me into the silence that came afterward. Into that space where pain and truth collide. Because it was there, in that invisible place where no one held me, no one heard me, no one noticed I was falling apart, that something began to shift, something no one predicted, not even me. Now take a deep breath with me and keep going, because what comes next is what truly matters, and I promise you'll want to hear it to the end. I remember that day with a sharpness that almost hurts. Some memories become so vivid they seem to gain scent, temperature, texture, as if you could touch them again. And that day smelled like something breaking inside me, even though, on the outside, I seemed perfectly fine. I woke up early, the same way I've done my entire life. Habits that follow women who've spent decades caring for a home, for family, for everything and everyone. The morning light slipped through the window softly, almost innocently, as if it had no idea of the weight sitting on my chest. I had no clue that within a few hours, my confidence would be torn away as if it meant nothing at all. And yet, something inside me was already uneasy, as if my soul knew before my body that the day would be different. Some events begin long before the moment they actually happen. The humiliation I lived through didn't start when they spoke those words. It had been building in silence, through the details I overlooked, the glances I pretended not to see, the attitudes I justified just to avoid hurting myself. The truth is, when someone finally wounds us, it's rarely the first time. It's just the moment when we can no longer pretend it doesn't hurt. And at 60, I was tired of pretending, tired of acting like certain things didn't affect me, tired of being strong all the time, tired of accepting so little and calling it enough. I left home that morning with a light heart, convinced it would be just another, ordinary day. There was no warning, no clear sign, only a vague feeling that I needed to brace myself for something. But I ignored it. Just like so many times in my life, I ignored the instinct that had always tried to protect me. I arrived at the place where everything would happen with the same humility and quiet calm I had carried with me my whole life. I was never the kind of woman who demanded attention. I always preferred to speak softly, observe, and let the world unfold without trying to control what couldn't be controlled. Maybe that's why it was so easy for them to hit me where it hurt. Maybe the silence I carried in my chest gave the wrong impression of weakness. Maybe I made it easier for people who saw me as someone who could be pushed down without resistance. But in that moment, I didn't know any of that yet. I walked into that space believing I would do what I always did: help, support, be present, give of myself. That's how so many of us were raised: to serve, to be available, to lend a hand. But no one talks about the price of constant giving. No one teaches us about the emotional exhaustion that comes from offering so much and receiving so little. No one warns us that even the most generous heart eventually gets tired. Mine was tired. I see that clearly now. But on that day, all I wanted was to do what felt right. The first thing I felt was the look. Sometimes a look carries more aggression than any word ever could. A look can reject you, wound you, cast you out. And that's exactly what happened. A look that said I wasn't welcome, that I shouldn't be there, that my presence disturbed them, that I should know my place. The weight of that look hit me like a silent blow, one of those hits no one else sees, but they knock you down on the inside. Before a single word was spoken, I already knew something was about to happen, something I didn't deserve, something that would change the way I saw those people forever. I stayed quiet, not out of fear, but out of habit. Older women, especially Black women, learn early that silence is sometimes the only shield we have to survive. But in that moment, my silence wasn't protection. It was a desperate attempt to stay in control. I didn't want to break open in front of them. I didn't want to give them the satisfaction of seeing my pain. I didn't want them to know how deeply their actions cut through me. And then the first sentence came, cold, precise, cruel. A short sentence but filled with enough contempt to collapse the strongest of hearts. A sentence that left no doubt about what they thought of me. A sentence that made me feel smaller than I truly was. When those words hit me, it felt like something fell inside me. I don't know how else to describe it. It was as if an old internal structure, one I had spent a lifetime building, suddenly gave way. I tried to stay firm. I tried to breathe. I tried to hold on to my strength, my history, my dignity. But the truth is, the ground vanished beneath me. Their words echoed in my mind so loudly that everything else faded. The room felt smaller. The air felt heavier. Life felt harsher than it should for a woman who had already survived so much. I heard laughter, not all mocking, some nervous, some complicit, some disguised. But hearing laughter in that moment cut through me like invisible knives. It wasn't just the sentence itself, it was everything together. The look, the tone, the atmosphere, the silence of those who stood by. It was the feeling of being alone while surrounded by people. A kind of loneliness I hadn't felt in decades, a loneliness I knew too well, but had promised myself I would never let consume me again. Yet, there it was, back with force, back like it had been waiting years for the chance to settle inside me once more. I tried to respond, but no sound came out, and maybe that was for the best. If I had spoken in that moment, it would have been the pain speaking, not the truth. My words would have been soaked in hurt rather than wisdom. So the only thing I could do was stand there, silent, trying not to let that humiliation define who I was. And still, for a few seconds, it did. It made me doubt myself. It made me feel small. It dimmed, even if for a moment, the strong woman I spent a lifetime becoming. The second sentence came like the final blow, as if the first hadn't been enough. It was as if they needed to reinforce their contempt, reassert the place they believed I belonged, make it clear that, to them, I had no worth. This second sentence was even crueler because it came wrapped in sarcasm, in disdain, in an arrogant confidence that they could say whatever they wanted without consequence. In that moment, I understood the depth of their disrespect. I stood still, not because I accepted it, but because my body simply didn't react. It's incredible how emotional pain shows up physically. My chest grew heavy, my breath got stuck, my hands trembled slightly, and inside, something broke. But along with that break came an unexpected clarity, a quiet clarity, a truth that began forming inside me like a spark, one that would later become a flame they were not prepared to face. And before I continue this part of the story, I need you to do something with me. Write in the comments, "I refuse to be silenced." That sentence has power. It creates unity. It shows you're walking with me through this memory that still hurts, but needs to be told. It's important, because every time someone declares that out loud, the weight of this story lightens just a little. And because I know that, just like me, many women have been silenced by looks, by words, by dismissal. Now, if you aren't subscribed to this channel yet, do it right now. This isn't just a request, it's a need, because here you'll find stories nobody else tells, pains nobody else acknowledges, truths most people ignore, and strengths many women forget they still have. If you don't subscribe, you'll miss exactly the kind of story that opens your eyes, warms your heart, and reminds you of your own worth. Subscribe because you deserve to hear what the world tried to hide from you. Subscribe because your life matters. Subscribe because here, every woman is seen, heard, and embraced. And because what comes next is going to move you deeply. When I finally managed to walk out of that place, it felt like my body had aged 10 years in a few minutes. My legs were heavy, as if every step was a fight against something pulling me back, trying to keep me stuck in that moment of humiliation. There was no shouting, no tears, no visible despair. What came was much worse. Silence. A silence that felt alive, following me like a shadow pressed against my chest, tightening, suffocating, reminding me of every detail of what I had just heard. I walked slowly, trying to convince myself that I still had some dignity left, even though inside I was falling apart. It's strange how we can feel like two different people at once, the woman who keeps walking and the woman who collapses inside. And I was both, without knowing which one would win that day. I didn't want to go home, but there was nowhere else to hide from the avalanche already forming inside me. My home had always been my refuge, the place where I survived other kinds of pain. But that afternoon, walking through the door felt like stepping into unfamiliar territory. Everything looked the same, the furniture in its place, the familiar smell, the light slipping through the curtains, the usual quiet, but nothing was the same inside me. And when we change on the inside, the world around us loses its shape. Home doesn't hold you the same way. The walls feel like they're watching, waiting for you to hit the floor so they can absorb the impact. The silence that once brought peace turns into your enemy. I sat down slowly, trying to organize my thoughts, but they came like violent waves, each one bringing a new piece of pain. I replayed the sentences, the looks, the coldness, the disdain. I relived my own silence, my frozen body, my inability to react, and reliving it hurt even more than living it. Because in the moment of impact, the body tries to protect itself, but in silence the mind protects nothing. It reopens everything. It revives everything. It amplifies everything. And that was where I felt the real blow. The silence hit me harder than any word could, a silence that seemed to scream inside me. Echoing through memories I thought were long resolved. It's hard to explain the kind of loneliness that takes over after a humiliation like that. It's not about being physically alone. I was used to that. It's an emotional, spiritual, identity-deep loneliness. It's looking at yourself and not fully recognizing who you see. It's asking yourself, even in silence, if the problem is you, if you're really not worth what you believed you were, if what they said carries even a small hint of truth, not because you agree, but because pain opens cracks where doubts never existed before. And in that silence, I felt every one of my cracks open all at once. I got up and walked around the house as if I were looking for something I didn't even have a name for. Maybe I was searching for strength. Maybe I was searching for memories that could prove to myself that I mattered, that my story meant something, that my journey couldn't be reduced to two cruel sentences. I touched objects, photographs, mementos that had witnessed decades of struggle, care, sacrifice, and faith. Each object seemed to tell a piece of my life, and yet none of it was enough to cover the hole that had opened inside me. I felt small, invisible, and at the same time, carrying a weight so heavy it seemed impossible to bear. I remember stopping in front of an old photograph. I was there, younger, with that light in my eyes that only someone who hasn't yet been betrayed by life still has. I stared at that woman as if she were a stranger, a distant memory. I felt such a deep longing for that version of myself that it hurt like losing someone. There, in that silence, I felt like something inside me was being torn out, not by choice, but because it no longer fit in the same place after what they had done to me. The emotional pain of a grown woman is different. It doesn't scream. It doesn't spill everywhere. It doesn't ask for attention. It sinks deep, hides behind your breathing, settles across your shoulders, makes a home in your bones as if it intends to stay. It's a quiet pain, but persistent. A pain no one sees. A pain you learn to hide, not because you want to, but because you believe no one could handle seeing it up close. And that afternoon, I felt that pain settle into me like it was coming back home, like it recognized me, like it was saying it had been here before. I tried to convince myself that it would pass, but the truth is, some pains don't pass. They change you. And in that moment, I didn't want transformation. I wanted peace. I wanted rest. I wanted a little love, maybe. I wanted a hug that never came. I wanted words that never arrived. I wanted to be seen as someone who mattered, But the silence stayed, stronger than any presence, a silence that revealed what no one dares to say out loud. Women like me carry wounds the world insists on ignoring. As time went by, I felt that humiliation start to mix with older memories. Memories of other days when I'd been made small. Other moments when I was treated like my voice had no weight. Other times I'd been silenced, interrupted, dismissed. And the more I remembered, the more I understood that what happened that day wasn't an isolated event. It was the peak of a lifetime of small aggressions, disguised hurts, and disrespect wrapped up as jokes. It was as if all my old scars had decided to open at the exact same time. I found myself thinking about how many women go through this every single day. How many are shut down by their own children. How many are mocked by their husbands. How many are ignored by their grandchildren. How many are treated as if their age were just a reminder that they're outdated instead of a sign of wisdom. How many carry the weight of an entire life on their backs and still aren't valued in the end. How many have heard words that should never have been spoken. How many have felt their chest tighten and stayed quiet just to avoid starting a conflict. How many have learned to swallow their own pain just to keep the peace around them. I wanted to cry. Not a desperate, out-of-control cry, but a deep, cleansing one that might lift some of the weight off my chest. But the tears didn't come. The silence was so thick, so heavy, that not even that could break through it. I stood there, frozen, trying to figure out how to keep breathing without feeling like I was breaking a little more with every minute that passed. I know it might sound exaggerated to someone who's never felt this kind of pain. But if you've been through something like it, you know there are humiliations that touch parts of the soul so hidden, they take a long time to heal. And that's why I want you to write in the comments, I won't stay quiet anymore. Because when we declare something like that, something inside us shifts, something wakes up, something starts to rebuild. That sentence isn't just a comment, it's a declaration, a promise to yourself. And in a way, it's also a way of walking beside me in this moment while I relive something so painful, yet so necessary to tell. As the afternoon went on and the silence kept wrapping itself around me, something inside me began to change, very slowly. It wasn't strength, it wasn't courage, it wasn't healing yet. It was something more subtle, the beginning of a question, a small flame starting to flicker in the dark, and it was this tiny internal movement, almost invisible, that led me to what would come later. When I least expected it, when I truly believed I had lost everything, when I thought that humiliation would be the last mark the world would leave on me. I didn't know it then, but that silence was preparing the ground for something that would change everything I believed about myself and about them. Something no one saw coming, and that's exactly why I need to keep going. Because what happened after that silence didn't just change that day, it changed the entire direction of my life. And that's where the story really begins to unfold. As I stayed there, submerged in that silence that felt like it wanted to consume me, an old memory started to move inside me, as if it were being brought back by invisible hands. It was as if the past were calling my name again, as if the voices of the women who came before me were waking up to remind me of something I'd forgotten in the middle of these fresh wounds. I closed my eyes without even realizing it, and it felt like opening a window to a time when I was still learning how to live, when my hurts were smaller and my strength hadn't yet been fully tested. And in that moment, I felt my mother's presence, not physically, but in my memory, in the echo of her voice, which always carried a mix of firmness and tenderness, the way only matriarchs know how to speak. She always said that life prepares us long before it wounds us, that no pain arrives alone, no humiliation comes without warning, no disappointment happens without something inside us already trying to signal it. And while I tried to understand why that humiliation had hit me so deeply, I could almost see her sitting in that old chair where she spent her afternoons, watching me with those eyes that always seemed to see what I couldn't see yet. My mother carried deep lines on her face, the marks of someone who lived more for others than for herself, but her eyes still held light, the same light I tried to find in myself that day, and couldn't, at least not right away. I remembered how she used to say that Black women carry in their chest a strength the world tries to erase every single day, but never truly can. A strength that comes from ancestry, from spirituality, from the women who came before us, from the ones who fought in silence, who built families with calloused hands, who cried where no one could see so they wouldn't scare their children. It's a strength you don't learn from books. It isn't taught with words. We inherit it. We absorb it. We grow into it without even noticing. And that afternoon, while my heart was still bleeding from what I had lived through, that strength began to whisper inside me, slowly, like someone waking up from a long sleep. I remembered a conversation I had with my grandmother many years ago. I was still young then, full of dreams that life would eventually trim down out of necessity. She told me that every woman is born with two voices, the voice she uses to speak to the world and the voice she uses to speak to herself. The first one shifts with circumstances, with what society expects, with the fears that try to shrink us. The second one, though, that one never changes. That is the voice of the soul, of identity, of the courage we often bury just to please others, to survive, to belong. My grandmother said that when life tries to knock you down, it's that second voice that will lift you back up. And in that painful silence, that was exactly the voice I needed to hear. My own, the oldest one, the truest one. I heard her voice from deep inside me. Don't let them diminish you. And that sentence echoed within me with a strength that took me by surprise. I kept repeating it silently in my mind, almost like a prayer. Don't let them diminish you. It was the exact opposite of what I had felt during that humiliation. I had allowed myself to shrink, allowed those cruel words to become larger than I was, allowed disrespect to weigh more than my entire history. But hearing my grandmother's voice in my memory, even if only inside my own mind, brought back a spark of dignity I thought I had lost. And that dignity, even small, began to hold me up. I started walking through the house again, but this time my steps weren't so heavy. It was as if I were being guided by memories. Every corner of the room seemed to whisper something I needed to remember. The embroidered tablecloth my mother made by hand, the old picture of my grandmother, smiling in a way that hid more pain than anyone ever knew, the books on the shelf my aunt used to say were tools to keep the mind from shrinking, the stories I grew up hearing about the women in my family who survived poverty, racism, tragedies that would have destroyed other people, but somehow gave them deeper roots. And I realized those memories were there for exactly this reason, to remind me of who I am. I understood then that my pain wasn't just mine. It was part of a long line, a legacy. The pain of the women in my family was also strength. It was wisdom. It was survival. And suddenly, everything started to make a little more sense. The humiliation I lived through that day wasn't just a personal attack. It was an attempt, whether intentional or not, to crack something that came from far behind me, to pull apart a strength that didn't start with me, but was handed down by women who refused to be completely broken, even when the world tried its hardest. And for a moment, I felt as if my mother were standing beside me, her hand on my shoulder, whispering softly, "You are made of us." And that touched me deeply, because I realized that my pain wasn't a sign of weakness. It was a sign of humanity. I realized that the humiliation struck so deeply because it struck everything I carry, the history of those who came before me and those who will come after. Black women are always taught to be strong, but almost never taught to be cared for. And in that silence that hurt more than any word, I understood that maybe life was forcing me to remember, through pain, that I was not born to accept crumbs of respect. I began to breathe differently, not because the pain had gone away, but because the memory of the women who raised me was breathing with me. It felt like each memory was a sign that my identity wasn't gone. It was just hiding behind the shock of humiliation. My mother's voice saying dignity is not something you give away. My grandmother's voice saying no one can diminish a woman who has risen many times before. My aunt's voices telling stories of struggle, resilience, unshakable faith. All of it surrounded me in that moment, as if I were being held by invisible but very real hands. And that's when I decided to write something to myself, almost as a way to anchor that returning strength. I grabbed a piece of paper, not knowing exactly what I wanted to say, and let my hand move on its own. I was not made to break. The sentence came out so naturally, it felt like it came from someplace deeper than my conscious mind. And I want you to write that same sentence in the comments. I was not made to break. That simple declaration carries enough power to change the course of a day. And maybe, if you're going through something similar to what I went through, it will help you remember the strength that still lives inside you, even if it's quiet right now. I kept remembering the stories my mother told me at night when I was a little girl afraid of the dark. She said every woman needs to know her roots, because that's where her true strength lives. And roots can't be seen, but they're what hold us up, just like the strength of the women in my family held me up through every step, even when I thought I was walking alone. And on that quiet afternoon, it became clear that I wasn't alone. I never had been. Every humiliation I ever lived through was also a reminder of their resilience, of the fact that my fight doesn't begin with me. And that realization opened a space inside me where before there had only been pain. It wasn't a space of relief, not yet. It was a space of understanding, of rebuilding, of something being rearranged inside me. And as that began to happen, I noticed the silence didn't feel as frightening as before. It still hurt, yes, but now it was speaking to me. It gave room for my ancestral memories to rise. It allowed the voices of the women who shaped me to guide me again. It let me breathe between the waves of pain instead of drowning in them. Slowly, I began to feel that something was about to change. I didn't know what. I didn't know when. But I knew that silence wasn't the end. It was the interval, the pause before life's next sentence. And I had no idea yet what was coming, what would be revealed, what would turn the entire meaning of that humiliation upside down. I only knew, somehow, that the lessons of the past were getting me ready. And as painful as it was to admit, life always finds ways to prepare us before it acts. I just couldn't imagine how deep what was coming would be. And that's exactly where the story continues. As I relived those ancestral memories and felt the strength of the women in my family spreading slowly through my chest, something else began to stir inside me in a different way. It wasn't just that old strength waking up. It was the memory of something that had always been there, tucked away, guarded, quiet, like a secret buried deep in the soul. A secret I never needed to reveal because I always knew that if someone ever tried to destroy me, that secret would be what kept me standing. And in that moment I realized that maybe that day had finally come. I took a deep breath, letting the air in slowly, as if preparing my body for a revelation even I had forgotten. Because when you spend years putting everyone else first, you become accustomed to hiding your own victories as if they were small things. But the truth is, I carried something inside me that no one could have imagined. Something I'd never needed to show to prove my worth. Something that had always been there, like an invisible shield. A part of me they never knew, and maybe that's why they thought they could shrink me with 2 sentences and a look of disdain. I walked through the house like someone searching for a lost object, but the only thing I was searching for was inside me. It was something I had earned with effort, pain, sleepless nights, hard decisions no one ever knew I had to make, something that had transformed me years ago, but I kept hidden like someone saving a diamond for the right moment. And in that silence, I realized that moment might finally be here. The ones who humiliated me, who laughed, who tried to make me small, had no idea what I had faced, what I had overcome, what I carried as a mark of strength. They assumed I was fragile because I am calm. They mistook serenity for weakness, kindness for submission, compassion for incapacity. But inside me lived a story that contradicted every assumption they had. I remembered the time when I had to rebuild my life from the ground up, when I lost everything I thought I could never lose. While everyone saw me smiling, I was fighting silent battles no one could have imagined. Battles that taught me pain can transform, loss can reveal, and life demands courage, even when you've run out of strength to give. I learned, in that period, that the world only sees the surface. But what sustains a woman is what lies beneath it. Roots, scars, hidden victories. And my roots were far too deep for the humiliation of that day to truly uproot me. I sat down again, but this time with more firmness. It felt as if the weight inside me was shifting, not getting lighter, but rearranging itself. And then, for the first time that day, I realized something important. They didn't know me. They thought they did. They thought they knew what I was capable of. They thought they understood who I was, but they knew nothing at all. They had no idea who I became when I had to survive losses that would break half the people I. No, they had no idea about the courage I had to summon when no one was looking. They had no idea about the choices I had to make in silence to protect the people I loved, even when no one was protecting me. And more than that, they had no idea what I owned, what belonged to me, what I had built without telling anyone. The truth they knew nothing about was stored so deep in my story that, for a long time, even I forgot it existed. But that day, in that heavy silence, that truth rose to the surface again, slowly, lighting up every memory. I had more power than they ever imagined. I remembered a very specific moment, years ago, when I had to make a difficult decision to guarantee my future. A decision I made alone, without announcement, without celebration, without seeking approval. I made it because I knew that one day my life might depend on it, and it was that decision that gave me something no one could ever take away, something no one asked about because deep down, they never cared enough to know, and I never bothered to tell. I didn't see a reason to. I didn't see a need. I've never liked bragging. I've always been the kind of woman who acts quietly, because I learned early that actions have far more power than words. But that truth I kept hidden was too big to stay buried now. I felt a different kind of warmth rise in my chest, as if that memory were reigniting something the humiliation had tried to extinguish. And I understood, right then, that the people who tried to diminish me had no idea who they were dealing with. They only knew the surface of my life. They only knew what I allowed them to see. They didn't know what I was capable of. They didn't know what I had overcome. They didn't know what I held in my hands, what I had achieved, what I had kept to myself. The truth I carried for years was living proof that I depended on no one to survive. And if they had known that, they would never have dared to humiliate me. And I wanted to ask, not as a question, but as a quiet invitation. How many truths do you carry that no one knows about? How many private strengths have you kept hidden just to survive? How many battles have you won without anyone ever knowing? Because if you're here with me, I know you also carry something. Every mature woman does. Every Black woman does. We learn to survive in silence because most of the time, no one wants to hear our story. But it exists, and I want you to write in the comments, I know my worth, because that phrase is a reminder that there is something in you the world can't see, but that holds your whole life together. As that truth rose inside me, I started to feel that something was about to change. Not because I planned it, not because I had the strength to face what was coming, but because life always finds unexpected ways to reveal what has been hidden for too long. And the more that memory returned to me, the more I realized that the humiliation of that day was just the spark. The world around me had no idea what was about to unfold. They didn't know who I truly was. They didn't know what I knew. They didn't know what I carried like a quiet weapon. And they were nowhere near prepared for what was coming. I took a deep breath and felt a different kind of calm. Not peace, preparation, as if my spirit were straightening its back for something already on its way. I didn't yet know how that truth would be used, or how it would fit into what was happening. But I knew. It existed, and in some profound way, it would change everything. I just didn't know how. And that's exactly why the story keeps unfolding. Because what you're about to hear is the part no one expected, not even me. I was still sitting there when, for the first time that day, I felt the air around me change. I don't know how else to explain it. It was as if the room, once heavy, began creating space. As if an invisible door were being cracked open without anyone touching it. A subtle feeling, almost too faint to catch, but so real it made me lift my head slowly, like someone sensing something big approaching. I hadn't fully understood the strength I carried until that moment, but it felt like life was about to show me how everything would fit together. And right there, in that exact moment, the world began to turn in a way no one could have predicted. For years, I believed justice only happened when someone apologized, admitted their wrongs, or took their words back. But life taught me, slowly, painfully, that real justice doesn't require any of that. Emotional justice doesn't scream, doesn't draw attention, doesn't create scenes. It moves in silence, the same way the humiliations we face do. And in that moment, Without me lifting a finger, life took its first step. It was as if everything I had endured had created an inevitable point of return. The truth buried inside me, the same strength I guarded for so many years, began pushing fate back into its rightful place. The change started small, so small it could have gone unnoticed. A comment I overheard by accident, a quiet sentence I wasn't meant to hear. But there was something there, something that revealed that what they had done to me had not gone unnoticed. The humiliation they tried to bury me under had begun to spread like a shadow across their conscience. Because life is like that. You think you can hurt someone and walk away as if nothing happened. But there is always an invisible weight attached to those actions. And that weight was already settling on them, even if they hadn't realized it yet. I heard my name spoken in a low voice, not with mockery this time, but with unease, uncertainty, as if they were starting to sense something was off. As if their conscience, finally waking up, had begun to stir. And that made me stay silent again. But now it was a different silence. Not the silence that froze me earlier. This was a silence of observation. A silence that knew. A silence that waited for the unfolding of whatever was coming. Because life was moving, and I didn't need to do anything at all for it to happen. And then came the first revelation. That truth I had kept hidden for so long, protected like a treasure, began rising to the surface without me saying a single word. Something unexpected happened that made them discover something about me they never imagined. I won't reveal it yet because this part needs to be told carefully, but I can say this. In that instant, the roles began to reverse. Everything they used to try to shrink me began to lose its power, as if it had been built on sand and the tide had finally arrived to wash it away. Who I was, what I had achieved, it all started to appear, and their expressions changed completely. There is a kind of silence that only shows up when someone who hurt you realizes they may have been wrong. A silence filled with insecurity, regret, shame. I know that silence. I saw it in their eyes the next day. They never expected me to have anything that could change the narrative. They never imagined that behind my calm demeanor, there was a story that contradicted everything they believed about me. They weren't prepared to handle the truth because they had built their humiliation on a false idea that I was fragile, powerless, easy to crush. But when they realized they were wrong, I saw in their eyes the same feeling I had felt that day, a deep impact that shakes the ground beneath your feet. I walked among them, with the calm only someone who knows her own story can have. And this time, it wasn't the silence of pain. It was the silence of strength, the kind of strength that doesn't need to show off, the strength of someone who knows that when justice arrives, it doesn't come loud, but it cuts deep. They watched me from a distance, trying to understand how that same woman, who the day before seemed so quiet, was now walking with a different posture. It wasn't arrogance. It never was. It was simply the truth sitting beside me, handing back everything they had tried to take. I remember the exact moment one of them saw me and immediately looked away. That kind of gesture reveals more than 1,000 apologies ever could. The shame was written all over him, even if he tried to hide it. Their conscience had started to wake up. Life was beginning to collect its debt, and I didn't have to raise my voice. I didn't have to defend myself. I didn't have to explain anything. The truth was doing all of that for me. That was when I felt something deep move inside me. It wasn't a desire for revenge. It wasn't a wish to see anyone suffer. It was something more mature, more peaceful, the awareness that I was no longer in the same emotional place as the day before. The turning point wasn't happening on the outside. It was happening inside me. The humiliation had tried to break me, but it was exactly what opened the path for me to reconnect with pieces of myself I had forgotten. And while they were starting to taste their own medicine, I was beginning to taste the truth of who I really am. But the world doesn't turn only on conscience. Sometimes it turns on facts. And the fact that came next was what truly flipped everything upside down. They found out something real about me, something that completely changed the way they looked at me, something that made that humiliation suddenly seem small compared to what I carried. And it didn't come out because I wanted it to. Life has its own timing, to bring to light whatever needs to be seen. I saw fear in their eyes, not fear of me, fear of the truth, fear of having messed with someone they shouldn't have, fear of realizing they had acted without knowing what was behind the surface, and their reaction, even in silence, was a gift, because it revealed exactly who they were. It showed they only respect what they understand. They only value what they recognize. They only back down when faced with something they consider big. And in that moment, I saw clearly, it was never really about me. It was about them. I was beginning to understand why everything had to happen the way it did. That humiliation wasn't allowed into my life as punishment. It was preparation, revelation, divine justice moving in ways I never could have predicted. And everything they did to push me down was now serving as the foundation for something much greater. The wheel was turning, the world was shifting, and I could feel it in every gesture, every glance, every pause. And before I go on with this essential part, I want you to write in the comments, "The truth always comes out," because that sentence carries a power that transforms, a courage that sustains, and a wisdom that protects. And deep down, you know that when the truth decides to step out of the shadows, no one can stop it. And that's exactly what happened to me. The truth began to step out of the shadows, and no one, absolutely no one, was ready for what would come next. The truth had started to move, and I could feel its weight traveling through every corner of my life, as if it were clearing a path, pushing the heavy air out, bringing in something new, not yet defined, but powerful. What I didn't know was that the next day, everything would become even clearer. Life, in its quiet and precise way, had decided it was time to reveal what needed to be revealed. And when I arrived at the place where everything had happened, I could feel something different in the air. It wasn't just the change in me. It was the change in their eyes, a look that said they had finally realized what they'd done. The moment I walked in, I felt the impact of their reaction. Some of them looked away quickly, like people trying to escape their own conscience. Others looked at me, but with a clear hesitation, like they were searching my face for some clue of what might happen. I noticed every detail, because women who carry pain in their chest eventually learn to read eyes the way others read words. And in that moment, their eyes said everything they'd never have the courage to say out loud. There was shame, there was regret, there was fear, and there was a quiet acknowledgement, the kind that doesn't ask for forgiveness, but clearly admits there was a wrong. I didn't have to do anything. I didn't have to say a single word. My silence spoke louder than any answer I could have given. And for the first time, I understood that my silence wasn't weakness. It was presence. It was posture. It was strength. They seemed to shrink in front of me, not because I had changed on the outside, but because something inside me had. I was no longer the woman who had simply stood there and taken that humiliation. I was now the woman carrying a truth that made them uncomfortable, unsure, exposed. And it's incredible how truth has the power to flip everything without us even lifting a hand. One of them tried to come closer, but froze halfway, as if remembering the words he'd thrown at me. He couldn't hold my gaze, and that showed me something important. The one who humiliates feels more shame about what they did than the person they tried to humiliate feels about the wound itself. The problem is that this shame only appears when the conscience wakes up, and that day, it seemed like every conscience in that room had woken up at once. One of them even started to speak as if he were about to say something, but stopped. There were no words that would fit, no apology big enough, no way to erase what had been said. I stayed on my feet, steady, and the feeling of power was so quiet, it almost felt sacred. Not the power to humiliate them back, that never interested me. It was the power of simply existing, the power of being seen, the power of being recognized as someone who never should have been treated that way. And that feeling was so deep, it made me want to take a deeper breath, as if I were finally making space inside myself for something that should have been there all along. Respect. My own respect for myself, which had hidden for a few days, but was now returning stronger than ever. People around us started to move differently, not physically, but emotionally. It was as if the entire room were adjusting to the weight of what had happened, as if the space itself were giving me back a place they had tried to take away. Some whispered among themselves, trading quick, uneasy glances. I caught pieces of phrases, scattered words like, over the line, shouldn't have, too much. Those words were loaded with late regret, the kind that only comes when someone realizes they went too far. And each of those phrases was a quiet reminder of what they'd done to me, but also of the change that was happening inside them. There was one moment I'll never forget. I had my back turned, fixing something, when I heard someone say, in a low voice, but clear enough for me to hear, "We shouldn't have said that to her." That sentence just hung in the air for a few seconds, like it didn't quite know where to land. And even though it wasn't said directly to me, I felt its impact, not as ego, but as confirmation of what my heart already knew. They were feeling the weight of what they'd done. They hadn't been ready to face that truth before, but now there was no running from it. And honestly, I didn't want them to suffer. That was never the point. All I ever wanted was to be treated with the dignity every human being deserves. And seeing that recognition, even silently, was like watching a door open in front of me. Not a door for me to walk into, but a door for me to walk out of that small place they tried to push me into, out of that space of pain, out of that feeling of invisibility. Because now they saw me, maybe for the first time. And that was more than enough for me to understand that the world truly was turning. There was also a different kind of respect in the air, not that fake politeness people use when they want to fix things quickly. It was a careful, almost fragile respect, as if they were weighing every gesture, every word, every look, trying not to repeat their mistake. And that effort, no matter how unsure, said more than any formal apology ever could. Because real regret doesn't live in what people say. It lives in how they change. And I started to notice those changes slowly, in the details, in the way they moved around me, in the way they thought twice before speaking, in the way their arrogance toward me began to fade. And the strangest thing was that the more they recognized my worth, the more discomfort I saw in their eyes. Because acknowledging someone else's dignity forces you to face your own smallness, and not everyone is ready for that. But that day, one by one, they had to face exactly that. And the expression on each face revealed what I already knew. The truth had gone too far to be ignored. They knew they were wrong. They knew they had hurt me. They knew they had been unfair. And that awareness was carving out a place inside them, whether they wanted it there or not. I could have taken that moment to strike back with harsh words. I could have shown anger. I could have done what so many people would have done. But the truth is, I didn't want to carry more weight than I already had. So I chose to stay silent. But now it was a different silence. A silence of someone who knows her worth. A silence that demands respect without asking for it. A silence that makes it clear that the hurt they caused no longer controls me. And it was in that silence that I realized something that changed everything inside me. Justice was already happening. Not loud justice, not forced justice, not justice by revenge, but moral justice, spiritual justice, emotional justice, the kind of justice that happens when the world turns just enough to put everyone back in their proper place. And that day, the roles were finally aligning. They felt the guilt, I felt the strength, they felt the shame, I felt the return. They felt the weight of conscience. I felt the lightness of my dignity settling back into my body. I'd like you to write in the comments, "You reap what you sow," because that phrase is exactly what was happening there. Not as punishment, but as consequence. Not as revenge, but as balance. Not as pain, but as an inevitable return. And as that day unfolded, as every look revealed regret and every gesture showed a shift, I started to understand that something even bigger was on its way. Something that wasn't just about them recognizing their mistake, but about life getting me ready for a turning point I couldn't avoid. And it was right there, in that moment when the world began to realign itself, that I realized this story still had a lot left to reveal. What would happen next would change not only how I saw what I'd been through, but also how I saw myself, and it was only just beginning. When I realized they had finally understood the weight of what they'd done, something inside me settled. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't total peace. It was something deeper, older, more solid, the awareness of my own worth, the awareness that humiliation tried to steal, but couldn't. And that was the moment I understood that the way I chose to respond would define not only how this situation ended, but also the kind of woman I would continue to be from that day on. I was 60 years old, 6 decades of life, of struggle, of loss, of starting over, of hidden wounds and quiet victories. I couldn't let 2 cruel sentences thrown carelessly at me turn me into someone I wouldn't recognize. The woman they humiliated the day before wasn't weak. She was hurt. And when wounds begin to heal, they hurt. They hurt a lot, but they also teach. And when I saw how uncomfortable they were, regretful, shaken by the truth that had surfaced, I understood something essential. My response needed to be different from what they expected. They might have expected shouting, confrontation, insults thrown back, an emotional explosion. But women who carry the wisdom of years don't need that. I took a deep breath and chose to respond in the only way that had ever kept me standing, with dignity. Dignity is the most powerful weapon a grown woman can carry. It doesn't cut, it doesn't bruise, it doesn't physically hurt, but it hits. It hits deep. It reaches the place where conscience sleeps, where the soul tries to hide from its own faults. And as I walked among them that day, I realized every step I took was a response. I was upright, I was whole, I was calm. And that kind of calm is what scares people who tried to destroy you the most. It's not the calm of submission, it's the calm of certainty, the calm of someone who knows herself, the calm of someone who knows exactly what she's worth. I began to act with the posture my mother and grandmother taught me, not with confrontation, but with presence, a firm presence, a presence that takes up space, a presence that does not shrink to fit into anyone or anything. They moved differently around me, as if they were afraid of making things worse in a situation that was already beyond their control. And I noticed how every little gesture of mine, no matter how simple, affected the atmosphere. I didn't say much, but every word I spoke seemed to find a new place to live inside their minds. There was no arrogance in my tone. There was clarity, and clarity scares people who are used to manipulating, belittling, and twisting things. I realized that the greatest answer I could give to that humiliation was to set boundaries. Not boundaries spoken out loud, but boundaries lived. The kind you feel in someone's behavior, in their eyes, in their way of existing. And I started with the details. I was no longer automatically available. I didn't offer help before being asked. I no longer rushed to solve problems that weren't mine. And above all, I made it clear, through my posture, that my respect would no longer be handed out as a gift to people who didn't know how to value it. That shook them, much more than any argument ever could, because that's how moral justice works. It doesn't scream, but it echoes. It doesn't attack, but it reaches. It doesn't force, but it transforms. They started speaking to me more carefully, more calmly, more thoughtfully. Suddenly, words like please and thank you started appearing in their mouths as if they had just learned what they meant. Not because they became better people overnight, but because, for the first time, they felt they had to measure the weight of every word they spoke in my presence. I had become a mirror to them, a mirror that reflected not only the wrong they had done, but also the fragility behind their actions. And the more I held my ground, the more they seemed disarmed. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't lose my temper. I didn't show anger. I simply existed. I existed with strength. I existed in truth. I existed with the kind of calm only someone who has survived a lot can carry. And that kind of existence is a powerful response. It's living proof that no matter how hard they try to shrink you, no one can take away what you carry inside. No one has access to the place where your true strength was built. I remember walking past one of them, the same one who had contributed the most to the blow on the day of the humiliation. On that day, he could barely look me in the eye. He tried, but couldn't hold it. And in that brief hesitation, I saw the weight of his conscience. His face showed someone who had finally realized that hurting a grown woman is not like hurting just anyone. It's wounding an entire story. A story built out of pain, but also out of overcoming. And when someone realizes that too late, regret arrives like a guest who has no intention of leaving. But I didn't want to see them suffer because of me. I just wanted respect. I just wanted dignity. I just wanted room to exist without being made small. And when I realized that space was being rebuilt around me, I felt something settle inside of me. It wasn't happiness. Not yet. It was something lighter, like the pain had finally started to find its place inside my body instead of flooding every part of it. And that feeling made room for something even greater. Wisdom. The kind of wisdom that comes with age isn't made of pretty sayings. It's made of falls, of humiliations, of disappointments, of new beginnings, of places where we cried, quietly, so no one would see. And when I looked at them that day, I realized I was finally using all the wisdom I had built throughout my life, as if every old wound had been preparing me for this moment. I didn't need to attack. I didn't need to prove anything. I didn't need to fight to be recognized. I already was. And who I was spoke louder than any explanation I could have given. I started responding to the world in a new way, not with words, but with presence. I started setting invisible boundaries, the kind people feel before they even touch them. They would pull back without realizing why. They would adjust their tone, recalculate their gestures. And more than ever, I understood that the strongest response a 60-year-old woman can give is to continue being exactly who she is, just with more firmness, more awareness, more truth. Write in the comments, "My silence speaks too." That sentence carries the exact spirit of that moment, because that's what happened. My silence spoke. My silence taught. My silence was the answer they did not see coming. And even though there was still pain inside of me, I could feel it being turned into something greater than the suffering itself. That was the day I understood, with the kind of clarity only maturity brings, that it was not my job to fix anyone. It wasn't my role to educate anyone. It wasn't my responsibility to heal anyone. My only responsibility was to myself, to protect my peace, my faith, my dignity, and my strength. And that's exactly what I did. Without yelling, without humiliating them back, without losing control, I simply stayed firm. And while all of that was happening, something even greater was coming toward me. Something that would completely change the course of this story. Something I didn't see coming, that they didn't see coming. And that turned the world in a way none of us could have imagined. And that's where this thread of a story keeps moving forward. Because what happened next still needed to be told. When it seemed like everything had finally found its place and the emotional dust had started to settle inside me, I realized something was still missing. Something I hadn't fully understood yet. Something that wasn't in their eyes, or in the silence they let slip, or in the fear that surfaced when the truth came out. This last piece was inside me. I needed to face what that humiliation had really awakened, and that's what led me to the deepest moment of this story. Not the most painful, but the most revealing. That late afternoon, as the sun began to slowly go down, I sat in front of the living room window, the same place where I had searched for answers to old pains so many times before. But this time, the answer didn't come as a memory. It didn't come as comfort. It didn't come as anger. It came as clarity. A clarity so sharp it felt like it had been saved just for that moment. And that was when I finally understood what life had been trying to show me from the very beginning. The truth is, the reason I endured the humiliation of that day, felt that pain run through every corner of my body, walked through a silence that hurt more than any word, wasn't to destroy me. It was to reveal me, to reveal the woman I had become, not because of my scars, but in spite of them. Sometimes life uses pain like a mirror, not so we can see our flaws, but so we can see our strength. And when I understood that, the weight of that humiliation finally began to shift inside me. I realized that the ones who humiliated me had no idea what they were setting in motion. They thought they were pushing me down, but in reality, they were pushing me back into myself. Because by hurting me, they brought to the surface things I had forgotten. My voice, my story, the strength of the women who came before me, the strength of my faith, the strength of my identity. They ripped off the mask of everyday routine and showed me that I was still shrinking myself to fit into places that were never meant for me. And that shook me in a way no words in this world could fully describe. But what marked me the most was realizing how life works in silence, how it moves the pieces without asking permission, how it balances injustice without any big announcements, how it places everything back where it belongs without needing an audience. And that's exactly what happened after that day. The truth came to light. Their eyes opened. Their conscience woke up. And I, for the first time in a long time, felt whole again. Not because I got apologies, but because I got back what they tried to rip away, my dignity. And then, as I watched the sky changing colors, I felt a strange but deep peace settle over me. Not the kind of peace you feel when everything is perfect. The kind of peace that's born when you survive what you truly believed you couldn't survive. The kind of peace that speaks softly, but firmly. You made it. You didn't win over them. You won over yourself. You beat the fear. You beat the silence. You beat the pain that tried to build a home in your chest forever. That was when I understood the phrase life had been trying to whisper to me all along. A sentence that didn't come from outside, but from within. A sentence that seemed to carry all the weight of what I had lived, but also all the strength of what I still would live. No one can shrink a woman who has already learned how to stand up on her own. No cruel word has the power to uproot a woman who knows her own story. No look of contempt can erase the strength in the eyes of someone who carries her ancestry in every step she takes. No humiliation wins against a woman who has been forced to rebuild herself more times than anyone will ever know. And that is the final truth. The truth that changed everything. The truth that turned my world in a way no one expected. The truth I needed to live to finally understand. My strength was never in how I reacted. It was always in my ability to remain standing, even when they tried to tear down my foundation. It was always in my faith, in my mindful silence, in my gaze that now carries more certainty than doubt. It was always in what life gave me, not in what they tried to take. And before I close this story, I want you to write in the comments, I rise. Because that phrase isn't just a symbol, it's a decision. And in a way, it's also a mirror. Every person who writes it is telling themselves that there is a new chapter waiting to be lived. A chapter not built on pain, but on awareness, on boundaries, on strength, on dignity. Now that you've heard this story to the end, there's another video on the screen that also carries a powerful message, a deep story, filled with the same emotional and spiritual strength that moves everything we do here. It isn't a continuation of this story, but it's another truth from women who refuse to give up, who refuse to stay down, who refuse to let the light inside them go out, even when the world tries to dim it. Click on it and keep walking this journey. There is more wisdom waiting for you.